Good morning to you on this morning after. We begin with the march and the movement that grew from the horror and heartbreak of the mass shooting in Parkland.
From South Florida to Washington, D.C. and around the world, millions on Saturday joined the call for an end to gun violence on campus and in communities. The turnout was staggering, a sea of people demanding a sea change in gun reform. It looked like the beginning of a movement the likes of which this country has not seen since the Civil Rights Movement or the anti-Vietnam War rallies. Speakers demanded change from Congress and from state leaders and threatened to vote out anyone who stands in their way. But will this new generation actually go to the polls?
So many questions for our guests. Casey Sherman is a junior at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, who was the lead student coordinator for yesterday's march in Parkland. Brandon St. Amos, also a Douglas High junior, just got back from D.C., where he and the Never Again movement marched and rallied. Tia Amoy Roberts is another junior at Stoneman Douglas, who also attended the march in D.C., and we also welcome Dylan Bowerman, a junior, also at Stoneman Douglas, who took part in the march in D.C. And everyone, thank you for being here. We have half the junior class here. Great to have you.
We are so glad you're here. Tia, tell me, what do you think the march yesterday, you were in D.C., as were three of the students here, what do you think it achieved?
Well, I think the goal of the march was really to show that young people can come together in a real, organized, and tangible way. Mm-hmm. And I think we executed it absolutely perfectly. Even though we had adults to help us along the way, I think what we really showed is that we can take an idea from the minds of a few and turn it into a crowd of millions
and
of people.
Towards a goal of what? What is the ultimate goal? I'm going to ask each of you this, but what is the goal?
Awareness about gun violence in America, and really, you know, where it starts is in the minds. So if we bring awareness, then we can affect change. So I think the goal really was awareness.
Dylan, you think the same thing? I want to sort of get a feeling of your own personal experience. I know, Casey, you were local, everyone else in Washington. Give us your impression that you took away from yesterday.
I would agree that one of the main focuses is awareness, because I think from awareness, people can't do anything without knowing about the thing that needs to be changed. So really, once we bring awareness to the issue, then we can start encouraging people to get out and vote, to push for change, to talk to their legislators and things like that.
That's something I really want to drill down, awareness. Brandon, what do you think?
I think that gun control and the safety of our schools in terms of how our buildings are structured are like the main end goals of our movement, but also like more security precautions, and in terms of the march, the main goal was to show how powerful we are in numbers.
Did you feel that?
I did. Like yesterday was powerful, like insanely powerful. I've never been a part of something so.
Was it sort of a life-changing experience to be there with 700, 800,000 people who all had the same purpose, the same feeling?
Exactly. Thank you. Just to see so many people from different backgrounds and races and ethnicities come together as one, because we all want the same thing, and that's to feel comfortable, again, to feel as if we have the right to not get shot, you know, up in our schools.
Casey, the local march was, you know, by local standards, pretty big and numerous. Not only you were in the Parkland, the kind of the ground zero march, but all over South Florida cities. Did you feel sort of that connection with Washington, or did you feel like you owned it in Parkland?
I mean, of course we were connected with Washington because the two are so important. They're the two most important marches out of the 800 or so that were going on around the country. So we absolutely were connected. We collaborated with them a lot, but we still did own it, because while we were connecting with them and making sure that we had the same general idea of what was going on, we were free to express ourselves and our ideas in our own way, which I feel was also another way that made the Parkland March so special, because we were able to incorporate a lot of ideas and a lot of students into this march, whereas it's very difficult to do that with a huge march on Washington when you can't have your whole school involved in the planning of it because just too many hands in the pot. And but Parkland kind of had a little bit more leniency in terms of that, which was really nice, and I think it was very appreciated by a lot of students also.
Casey, one of the
hearing
things,
performances.
one of the things that you said, and here you are in the video that we are showing, that I thought was remarkable and showed great insight and political astuteness, was you said, we believe in the Second Amendment. We're not trying to abolish the Second Amendment. We don't want people to go into your homes and take guns. Elaborate on that. What do you mean?
I mean, because ever since the Constitution was first written, people have had their Second Amendment rights, and that's understood. That has never been, we've never been trying to take away your Second Amendment rights. I mean, you have those, and I think that the main thing that we're trying to get at is that while you do have your Second Amendment rights, the Second Amendment was first implemented for people to have some sort of means to protect themselves if the government was ever going to take over. It was to
well-regulated militia.
Yeah, it was kind of keep that balance in check, but that doesn't mean that they need to have assault rifles. That's just not necessary, and I think that that's kind of what we're trying to hint at and get at, not really hint at, we're stating it very clearly.
You're saying it boldly, you're saying it boldly.
Yeah.
You know, you want to get rid, is that not right, Brandon? One of certainly the goals of Never Again is to ban assault rifles.
Weapons of war. I don't believe that any 19-year-old or anyone really should have a weapon of war in their home unless you're in the military, you know, out in the field, like actually, you know, if you're a part of, like, actually being a part of a war. I don't think that anyone in our society should have assault rifle.
You know, we were talking, there are 4, 5, 6 basic, you know, they're called platforms, tenets, that the goals of the march, and I know you all sort of know bits and pieces of it, but basically they are very similar to the kinds of things like assault weapon ban, high capacity magazine ban, the restraining orders that actually we've seen implemented in Florida to take away guns from people who are endangered to themselves. This is the kind of thing that now is a political, a package of politics that need to go to lawmakers. And I want to get your sense of, Dylan, you first, what has happened in Florida already is a set of laws that named for your school, the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Public Safety Act. The governor is very proud of that. Some of the parents and students were very involved in crafting that. What's your take on those laws?
I think that those laws are a very good first step. I don't think that they're the end, and everyone still needs to keep working to get nationwide laws and more comprehensive laws everywhere.
Which ones do you think?
Like background checks.
Universal background checks?
Yeah.
Universal and very comprehensive background checks. I think that should be one of the easiest things and least threatening to the people that really do value their guns, because I am not against
polls show
guns.
that people agree with that. Most people in the U.S.
And
too.
high
like
capacity ammunition magazines. That's another one, is it not?
Yes.
Yeah.
Tia, want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I definitely agree with the fact that it is a first step. I think there are parts of the bill that don't go far enough. Such as they didn't ban assault rifles, which I understand was, you know, not agreed upon, so that's why it wasn't passed. But I feel like it should have been, and also I feel like parts of the bill step just a little bit too far. Such as being able to arm, you know, people in school.
Armed
teachers,
personnel and
yes,
teachers
personnel
and other, although
not,
let me make it clear, the bill says somebody who is exclusively a teacher will not be armed if they so chose, but a coach, you know, any other school personnel.
Yeah, and I feel like that was worded very carefully too, so that there could be many teachers that could have weapons in their classrooms, because since it says exclusively, as soon as that teacher becomes anything else within that
a debate
school,
coach, a cheerleading coach.
Exactly, that they're allowed to own that weapon, and that doesn't make us at school feel any safer.
Yeah. Dylan, would you feel safer if you knew that somebody down the hall from your classroom, a teacher, a coach, had a handgun or some kind of a weapon?
I've always held the belief that schools should be able to defend themselves, but I don't think teachers or any school staff are the way to do that. I think that more police officers and people who spend hours upon hours of time training with criminals with their weapons they are the ones that would be able to defend the school.
Right, trained police officers,
Yes.
not a
Full-time
teacher
law
who,
enforcement
even a
officers.
teacher who gets 132 hours of training, it's not necessarily enough. And in this instance, tragically, on Valentine's Day, if Coach Weiss had a gun, a handgun, he was no match for Nicholas Cruz, who had a semi-automatic rifle. Casey, I mean, this, he gave his life. The coach did, but whether he or Mr. Beagle or anybody else had tried to stand up to this student, who knows what would have happened.
Yeah, I mean, you're also saying, like, and I've tried to express this point also as I've been speaking to many people about this topic. I mean, by giving teachers guns, no matter how much training you're giving them, they're not signing up for a job like that, and you're expecting that they're going to be able to aim and shoot properly and actually hit the target, and God forbid not hit another student or another faculty member, or not hurt themselves. I mean, it's just, there's so many other factors that weigh in, just because that's not what they're signing up for. They're signing up to be a teacher, not somebody who's going to wield a gun.
We have a lot to talk about, including what happens now at the polls. Is there going to be from March to the polls after a March for Our Lives? And it's one of the things we'll talk about when we come right back, so stay tuned. We are back with much of the junior class of Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School, who were all involved in yesterday's marches, and we want to talk about engagement. Where do we go from here? And I mean, we've watched in the last month and a half an enormous engagement in not only the gun and safety issue, but in politics in general. And before we get started in this segment, let's turn our attention to one of your schoolmates, David Hogg, who was in Washington at the march and said this about young voters.
First-time voters show up 18% of the time at midterm elections. Not anymore. And to those politicians supported by the NRA that allow the continued slaughter of our children and our future, I say get your resumes ready.
Casey Sherman, this is really, and I think, a crucial point, is translating the passion that you have brought to the subject to the ballot box, registering to vote. I take it you probably are not yet 18.
No.
Have you pre-registered to vote? Or
Yes.
You have? Good
Everybody
for you.
here?
Yes.
Yeah, good for you.
Recently in the last month.
Last week.
Because of this issue.
All right, that's very encouraging. So, I mean, here you hear David Hogg, your classmate here at MSD, saying we are going to be a force at the ballot box. How are you going to do that?
I mean, something that we pushed at the Parkland March a lot was registering people to vote, and we were really stressing the importance of that. I mean, we were pushing that code that I know they had at a bunch of the marches about texting March to 50409, and like that, it's just so important. We had maybe, I don't know what the number was, maybe 6 different registration companies that came, maybe more than that, I'm really not sure, but I mean, that's the most important thing, and I think that our steps in terms of the team that I worked closely with for the Parkland March, we're really going to push voter registration. We're kind of going to sit down this upcoming week and really figure out, okay, what's our next step to get these students out to the polls? Because I mean, that is the most important thing.
I'm sorry. You've got to find candidates whom you support, and obviously you know some who you don't support. I mean, the sort of the bête noire, the person, the politician most criticized yesterday, Tia Moy, was Marco Rubio. Senator Rubio was singled out by a number of speakers, including David Hogg. What is it about Senator Rubio that he has done or hasn't done that bothers you?
I feel like he's refused to adequately address what we've been saying about, especially because he takes a lot of money from the NRA. I don't know if you saw on that podium that David was speaking on, the $1.05 little price tag, which was basically, you know, is this how much our lives are worth to you based on how much money you take from the NRA?
The number of students in Florida public schools and the amount of money through his political action committees is over $3 million that he took $9,900 directly from the NRA, but then there is this other $3 million or so that is received. But, you know, Brandon, Senator Rubio says, look, he said at the CNN town hall meeting after the shooting, he said, people buy into my agenda. They don't buy me. Do you believe that?
Either way, if they're buying into his agenda, then his agenda must fit theirs. I don't see any reason for the NRA buying into him specifically unless he agreed or supported their agenda.
So I want to just make the point on, we had pulled some stats today, and this is something that I didn't know, and maybe you didn't either, that this year, what they call millennials, and I think for this case, millennials are 18 to 35, so a bit older than you, but millennials will be the largest potential voting bloc, and the numbers are just staggering. But the question is, will millennials actually register and vote? And Dylan, you had mentioned before that this march brought awareness. I'm going to tell you, sitting here from our newsroom perch, gun violence has been in the national conversation for years. And so what is it about this particular moment in time that you believe this awareness has galvanized people, students, to register to vote? This is a two-part question for you. And so now that there's one issue that everyone's involved in, what about all the other issues that people like Senators Rubio and Nelson and all your congressmen and women, I mean, where are you going as you've become so aware?
Well, for the first part, I think that since this issue is really being pushed by students as opposed to adults, I think that's a major factor to why it's had such an impact, because it's showing that we're not the generation that doesn't care or doesn't pay attention to anything.
Feel empowered.
Yes, we are pushing for what we think needs to happen, and whether that is or isn't something that happens too often, it's a statement in and of itself.
That's an interesting perspective, excuse me. Tia and Casey, I think of the day after President Trump's inauguration, there was this women's march that looked just like that, what we were looking at. Hundreds of thousands of people descending, and in the past year since then, women issues really have bubbled to the surface. Tia, do you think that after yesterday, that the gun violence and gun safety issue will remain through the next election?
I think it definitely will. Going back to, talking about voters and registering to vote, and it's just something that we're pushing, not just for gun reform, but for any reform that you want to see done. So my mom actually volunteered to register people to vote at the march in DC.
Yeah,
so it's just things like that. We're pushing you to vote, but not because of this specific goal, but because of any goal.
I meant to bring something up before. Brandon, Marco Rubio is not on the ballot in November. And what I thought was really interesting yesterday was as much attention as being paid to him. He's not on the ballot in November. He's got four more years. So my question to you is, who are you targeting in November? Have you thought about that?
In terms of who's opposing our movement, I personally don't know. I don't think it matters who it is as long as they're opposing what we want to see done. I don't think.
So a politician who says no assault weapons are protected by the Second Amendment and I would not vote to ban them, is that the kind of politician whom you would say we've got to find somebody to run against him or her?
Yeah, exactly.
All right, before we take a break, Senator Rubio, I want to make sure we be fair here, sent out a tweet yesterday. Let's put it up on the screen so we can see what he said about yesterday's March for Our Lives. He said, today many are peacefully exercising their First Amendment right to march for a gun ban. Many support gun ban, but many others see it as infringement of Second Amendment that won't prevent shootings. Protest is a good way of making a point, but making a change will require both sides finding common ground. Casey Sherman, finding common ground is really the American way of politics. You're not against finding common ground.
No, I mean, compromise is the entire basis of democracy. Without that, what is our government built on? I mean, and that's what we also have been trying to stress, that it is about finding something that we can both agree on.
This is what democracy looks like.
Yeah.
We'll be right back. Stay tuned.
Welcome back. Live in our studio this morning, we are speaking with 4 students from Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High. They are all juniors. Brandon, one of the things that a number of students said at the rally in D.C. where you were is, okay, I'm young. I mean, there was one really beautiful young woman, 11, who said, yeah, I'm talking from my heart and I have an opinion. But a number of them said, don't dismiss us because we're just kids or children. Do you feel that way?
Definitely, because the cynics they say that people shouldn't listen to us because we're kids, those are the people that don't know anything about movements. The civil rights movement and Martin Luther King's, his movement was propelled by teenagers, it was inspired also by the girls that were killed in the church bombing. The anti-Vietnam War movement, the anti-Vietnam movement was propelled by teenagers and young adults.
That was my era. I remember, as a matter of fact, I looked at those pictures of you all in DC and I thought back to 1972, where I was one of maybe 500,000 people standing on Pennsylvania Avenue protesting the Vietnam War. I mean, it was just and also I thought there were some immensely emotional moments and moving moments. Dylan, I thought that young woman from Chicago who told the story about going into a store and a guy trying to rob the store, and then he took a gun out and pointed at her and said, you can never talk about this or I'll kill you. And she said, but I'm here talking about it. I mean, that was just one of several moments. What about you? What did you see that moved you?
I, like you, was also very moved by the 11-year-old girl that said, there's no adult behind this that's telling me what to say. There's no one prompting me to say any specific thing. Like, these are my opinions. These are really what we believe, which I think is shared by the teens, us.
Casey, you mentioned earlier, this might have been during the commercial break when we spoke, that this is a nonpartisan movement. I will say, in some respects, it felt in the past month as it got kind of partisan in many ways. How do you get past what is a very deep divide over, not only in this country, but over these specific issues?
I mean, as soon as you bring up the word gun control, automatically people go to one side or the other.
What about gun safety instead of gun control?
Yeah, so that's something I actually, in my speech yesterday, I kind of tried to express that we're not fighting for gun control, it is gun safety, because the second you say control, the connotation that comes along with that, it makes people automatically jump to conclusions about what you're trying to do. They think that you're trying to take their guns away, which is not what we're doing. And so gun safety is a completely different term entirely, and I think that's really important for people to understand that we just want to promote safety. That's what we want, and that's what everybody wants. It's just we're kind of not understanding each other, and that's the biggest problem.
Tia, what do you think about that?
What about that, Tia?
I think that's definitely true. A lot of the reason that it seems like such a partisan issue and it seems like we're butting heads so vigorously is because we're not understanding both sides of the argument. So liberals don't understand the conservative side of view, and conservatives don't understand the liberal point of view. But I think we fail to recognize that we really just want the same thing. Like, nobody wants children to die, and so at the end of the day, it's like, okay, so how do we get these children to stop dying, and how do we get people to stop killing them? And once we understand that we're on the same side of the issue at the end of the day, then we'll be able to come and find a common ground.
Brandon, you're shaking your head. You want to weigh in on that?
Oh no, everything that the two ladies said, I completely agree with. You couldn't have said it better.
And Dylan too.
And
before we end our part of the conversation, I just want to say the end of the rally yesterday, Casey, you were here, but to see Emma Gonzalez stand on that stage, name the victims of the shooting, the 17 victims, and then stand there for 6 minutes and 20 seconds in silence with tears rolling down her face. It was such a remarkable moment. I had tears in my eyes as I watched her do this. Brandon, what was it like to be there to see that?
To watch her stand there for what we all believe in, and knowing her personally, I was so moved. Like that, probably before and during her speech, I felt this overwhelming sense of sorrow come into me. But as she finished, I felt this sense of hope, and I just felt this sense of power, you know, and like I feel like we actually have like control over, we're going to have control over this issue. I feel like something's going to change.
That is such a beautiful way to end our discussion today, and so appreciate all of you coming in, really. And
Thanks so
best
much.
of luck.
Thank you.
Great to have you here.
Thank you.